At the other end of the scale we find the cranks, people who may end in an asylum or a nursing home through overdoing things and lacking moderation in their search for the perfect state. In the middle of the scale we find the people who are as much put off by the cranks as they are by the slovens, and continue in doubt as to how seriously they should treat the whole subject. It will be well, therefore, to take a comprehensive glance at the question of physical fitness and decide what are the few essentials necessary for its maintenance. It is of paramount importance to realize that the body is built by the mind or ego. We are what we think. It is the ego which drives the machinery, which directs the habits of the brain, and which selects from the elements of food and air just what it chooses to use. That is why one person will keep healthy and happy on a few grains of rice while another will perish of undernourishment on a quite fair diet. No amount of food, air, or exercise will help anyone unless he has the will to be well and the will to be happy, and if he has these qualifications then he will be comparatively independent of his air, food, or exercise. This is the first fundamental truth to realize about health. We are as healthy and as happy as we wish to be. If we know how to live, how continually 128 diet and exercise to adore and accept the divine will in whatever guise it is working out, and never to act contrary to the tide of nature, then health and joy will abundantly flow through us, irrespective of accidental man-made conditions. Most people have not a living faith. Even a quite sincere Christian goes about in a perpetual state of worry, about himself, others and the world in general. We can only progress through painful experiences, therefore we should welcome such events with keenness. If we believe that death is a gate to a brighter life then we should never fear it. We are not logical, and we only half believe things. Therefore our minds are divided against themselves, and this constitutes an inner conflict which naturally poisons and undermines our systems. The first essential to health, therefore, is to believe in ourselves, our power over ourselves and our destinies. The second thing to recognize is that we are meant to be happy. We have not been given the wealth of beauty and wonder which surrounds us on all sides merely to ignore it. We have not been given bodies capable of 100 enjoyments merely to deny them. For centuries thwarted and jealous killjoys have been busy misinterpreting religion and human nature, insulting and slighting the very works of their Creator in the natural human functions. If only they had taught love and again love in its fullest sense, people's hearts would have become too full and too broad to need to resort to petty physical indulgencies for the capturing of a faint reflection of the universal union. The body should not be disdained, misunderstood, or driven to death. It is our wonderful servant, our intricate tool, and the sacred temple of our inspirations. Therefore we must cherish it and nourish it, remembering that joy is the greatest of all nourishment. We must learn how to enjoy, and that this faculty lies within us, not without us. A blind man chained in a dungeon has yet the capacity for infinite joy within himself. And we who are free can 129 the finding of the third eye drink in joy from a little square of blue sky, a twinkling star, a budding leaf, or a flake of snow. We can find a world of wonder in the eye of a fly or the instinct of a building swallow. We must also enjoy the many delicious things which constitute man's food. We must make of eating a sacrament, not a grossness, nor a dull necessity. When we eat we are performing a miracle, but the miracle is only as complete as the enthusiasm which we apply to it. From a physical point of view we are the result of what we eat and how we eat, So we must never forget to treat our period at the table as an event entirely unto itself. Those people who gobble hurried, overlarge, or meager meals while screaming with laughter or frantic with worry, and with their minds in a state of rush or restlessness, are committing sacrilege and suicide in subtle form. It is not of much use to concern ourselves with diet until these primary matters are attended to. We can easily sum up the first essentials as follows: deep, slow breathing produces a supply of oxygen for the combustion of food. One should never eat while breathless, hurried, worried or upset. Calm down first, remembering that nourishment taken by a person in such condition turns to poison. In fact, it is much better to miss a meal altogether, waiting until the system has recovered. Many people do not realize what a large part of the digestive process should take place before the meal is swallowed. That is why the importance of slow and thorough mastication is always emphasized. A very necessary part of the nourishment can best be absorbed through the walls of the mouth. People who bolt their food have to exist without this primary stage of the digestion. While in the mouth most of the vital living forces of the food are meant to be abstracted, but, once swallowed, the acid digestive juices neutralize these forces and part of the potency of the food is lost. Quick eaters do not obtain the stimulation to the brain and nerve forces which is the reward of eating slowly. It is a mistake to drink with meals. Food should be taken as dry as possible, without being drowned in liquid or sauces, as this 130 diet and exercise prevents the digestive juices from contact the food. Drinking should take place before eating or in between meals. Animals do not drink and eat at the same time. Remember always to eat too little in preference to too much. This will be easy once the speed is reduced. Many people eat an appallingly complicated mixture of foods at one meal, most of which are incompatible. Adults should be very sparing with starchy foods, which are no longer so necessary to them. They should not take starch with acid-making foods such as meat, as this causes fermentation. The famous British lunch of roast beef is ruined by its accompaniment of bread, Yorkshire pudding, potatoes, peas, and pastry tart, which array of starch turns the meal into an outrage. Instead of starch we should concentrate upon those foods which give us mental and nervous energy, containing phosphorus and vitamins, such as green vegetables, fruits, and salads. We should remember that everything which we are able to eat in its raw state is more than twice as strengthening as cooked food. Another primary necessity for health is the complete natural elimination of all waste matter from the body. Lack of this achievement is the fundamental cause of almost all disease. It can be assured by correct breathing, see Chapter 8, sparing diet containing roughage, an intensive chewing of all food, and naturally induced perspiration. If these few simple rules are followed and whatever changes to be effected in the diet are made gradually, a sure foundation for physical fitness will be built up, without the individual becoming a crank or a pest to himself or others. But the most important of all is thorough mastication. A 24 hours fast taken every 3 or 4 weeks will be of extreme benefit, and can do no possible harm, as long as the faster does not wish to think that it is killing him. If he is really too terrified of the extreme danger of this proceeding, he might bring himself to miss one meal occasionally. These little attentions give a chance to the internal organs to perform a much-needed spring clean, which they are always anxious and willing to do if given the chance. 131 The finding of the third eye. A great many people are perturbed by the question as to whether or not to eat meat. An authority stated in the newspaper recently that the consumption of meat is falling rapidly, and that the choice seems to be whether to return to meat eating and the strong warlike nature of our forefathers or to give it up and become more peaceable and gentle. As the whole world is crying out for peace and brotherliness, the latter course would certainly seem to be the more desirable. No idealist or advanced person really likes the idea of eating meat. Many believe that it is a barbarism which will gradually disappear with the passing of the Dark Age. It is quite possible to be strong and active, as many are, on a meatless diet, but after half a lifetime of meat eating many systems may find a temporary difficulty in readjustment. Here again crankiness must be avoided. Meat may gradually be relinquished until there is a sound knowledge of the necessary substitutes, such as nuts and cheese. But apart from any question of principle, most people would improve in health in measure as they gave up all flesh foods. The question of alcohol and smoking naturally arises at this point. There again it must be an individual concern for each person. Alcohol is an artificial stimulant and a poison. Its action if taken any quantity is to drive the ego partly out of the body. The ego can only use the body when it is of a certain temperature. Extreme cold forces the ego out, and unconsciousness ensues. Overheating has the same effect, resulting in fainting or the delirium of fever. Constant driving out of the ego through alcoholism loosens its grip upon the body and allows outside entities or influences to gain admittance, with the various and dire results, such as obsessions and deliriums while the victim is still partly conscious of the lower astral world. Alas, those snakes and rats are not imagination. No self-respecting and earnest person will care to indulge unduly in any stimulant, drug, sedative, such as smoking, excitement, or emotionalism which prevents him from being entirely himself and the captain of his own soul. Nevertheless, a sudden violent reactionary effort towards complete abstention in any of these matters may have, of course, an 132 diet and exercise equally overbalancing effect upon the individual. Common sense, moderation, and a love of the natural joys of living will keep the situation under control. For instance, discrimination between raw spirits and delicate wines is a case in point. Hand in hand with the question of diet comes the problem of exercise. It is recognized now that men and women have no longer strenuously to hunt for and prepare their food, that they need a substitute for the exercise they would obtain if living in a natural state. In other words, human beings have a tendency, unless otherwise obliged, to sink into habits necessitating only those few movements which the routine of their lives demands. They mostly move of necessity and not from pleasure. True, we are learning to take exercise, but the same exercises, such as tennis or cycling, are liable to be taken by any and everyone, irrespective of their particular nervous or muscular condition. There have been many cases of an overstrained businessman dropping dead at his game of golf for the simple reason that additional concentration was the last thing he needed. College rowing also sometimes results in an overstrained heart, which may handicap the unfortunate youth for the rest of his life. It is a magnificent thing that physical culture is claiming public attention and enthusiasm, but it is not quite such a simple wholesale affair as may be imagined. A little individual knowledge and intelligence applied to it will do much to aid the authorities. In the pressure of modern life many of us get quite a lot of movement. We rush from one place to another, anxious and hurried, with our muscles tensed up rigidly most of the time. In this case our exercises should be relaxing ones, designed to counteract the tension of our lives and give our nerves and muscles a rest. Most people are quite unable entirely to relax their brain, nerves, and muscles. If they could once learn to do so for a short time each day, they would rapidly grow young again. The second thing to consider is our habitual position, according to what our work is. Those people who spend many hours bent 133, the finding of the third eye double over a desk, are not helping themselves by bending again over a golf club. They must choose a form of exercise which bends the spine in the opposite direction. It will be seen that serving at tennis has somewhat this effect, although actual back stretching exercises are better. Swimming is a fine exercise for the spine. If we turn to nature, we can see at once the exercises which animals take. Cats and dogs stretch themselves, shake themselves, and roll upon the ground. We cannot do better than learn from nature. After sleeping or working we should stretch and stretch and stretch again, in every direction we can think of, both lying down and standing upon our toes. Particular attention should be paid to relaxing the back of the neck, as that is the portion of the spine which is kept most continually and unnaturally tensed. It is tensed in thinking. Sleep is only possible when complete relaxation at the back and base of the skull takes place. After having stretched until every single ligament in our bodies has had its turn, then let us shake ourselves. Stand up in bare feet and relax every muscle loosely. Then shake yourself about, imagining that you are both intoxicated and boneless. Continue this until you are sure that every single muscle has relaxed. Then lie down and try to relax the whole of the legs and feet. Follow this with deep, slow breathing. These exercises may sound strange to those who are accustomed to Swedish drill. Drilling has also its advantages for strengthening and using the muscles, but relaxation correctly performed achieves a release and refreshment for the nervous system not to be found in any other way. The Western idea of exercise seems mostly to consist of violently agitating every limb of the body in turn, until reduced to a state of exhaustion. The Easterns exercise in such a way as to conserve instead of expend energy. It is said that those who join the sacred schools of physical culture and are trained by the yogis learn to exercise while sitting still in one posture and concentrating upon each nerve and muscle. They use special postures to stimulate any given nerve in the 134 diet and exercise body or brain. It is said that in this way they can cure any disease, acquire a fine physique and live a phenomenally long life. The modern osteopath is beginning to discover possibilities of this nature also, but, of course, he works from the outside. Rolling on hard ground is an excellent form of massage which tones up the muscles and disperses soft fat. The finest exercises, then, are those in which the animals indulge. Next in order comes the equally natural exercise of swimming. Other more violent forms of sport may not always be beneficial. In any case, their drawback is that directly they are discontinued the muscles suffer from the changed conditions and the victim may grow plumper than ever, or develop rheumatism. It is often remarked how champion athletes are liable suddenly to succumb to diseases which do not defeat the weedy little man. The question of exercise must therefore be approached individually and not collectively, bearing in mind that our chief object should be to counteract the tensions and postures of our daily life, and to cultivate a simple joy in the suppleness of our bodies and the ecstasy of free and rhythmic movements. 135 136 Part 2 137 138 13 The third I underscore 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 In the preceding chapters a bird's eye view has been taken of the conditions surrounding developing humanity. The possible fruits of a deeper understanding of various aspects of life have been considered, such aspects, for instance, as the planetary influences by whose aid we develop, and which we can study through astrology and numbers, and by their manifestations through color, sound, and form. A little research has brought to light the possibility that the discoveries of men of science today may coincide with the knowledge of the mystics of all times, with a difference only of presentation and nomenclature, and the fact that the mystics always postulated an ultimate cause and law behind all phenomena, while present-day scientists seem afraid to link up with such big issues. Finally, we have considered the perfecting of our physical life through more intelligent control of diet, exercise, and the human relationships. Let us now draw away the veil still further and take a peep at what may be the future awaiting man when he struggles out of the rut of materialism and finally takes the reins of his life into his own hands. It looks as if the powers that be are tantalizing humanity into making this effort, because they are allowing hints and bits of knowledge to filter through in a more general way than ever before. We find all sorts of unexpected people playing enthusiastically with these jewels as if they were bright new toys. On every hand we hear glib talk of trances, visions, healings and divine guidance. We hear of intimate relationships with the masters, of mystic experiences upon the path. We are given full details of initiations, reincarnations, 139 The finding of the third eye and magic black and white. Hundreds of societies and cults with scores of teachers have sprung up everywhere like a mushroom growth, and of course they mostly claim to be the especial instrument of the Great White Lodge. Now, it may be that many of these people are childish, and that some of them remain materialistic, and jealous, and even profiteer with their spiritual goods. Nevertheless, two things stand out. Firstly, there is a growing widespread demand for enlightenment on these subjects, and a deepening sense of the existence of such knowledge. Secondly, everything that is being given out everywhere bears the same stamp, posits the same laws, and makes fundamentally the same promises, in spite of superficial and surface differences. It would all appear to come from one original source, and that source to have been the very ancient teachings of the greatest sages and mystics of all times, which has existed the world over in much the same form. And although people are still perhaps infantile and naive over the treasures of knowledge so freshly represented to them, yet their interest is intense and their numbers are growing. Furthermore, as in all their various forms these teachings yet tally in laying emphasis on brotherhood, unselfishness, generosity, and peace, they would seem to form some kind of opposition to the propensities for slaughter, oppression, greed, and selfishness which are causing widespread havoc in various parts of the world. True, among these cults are to be found many cranks, hypocrites and other undesirables, but these people would exist in any case. They may have more chance of regeneration where they are. It is necessary always to distinguish between the teaching and the teacher. It is possible to learn beautiful truths from a very unbeautiful character, who in that way may be working off his karmic debts. The great revival of interest in occult subjects began towards the close of last century. It is said that the close of any century ushers in a foretaste of the knowledge to be assimilated in the next. Certain it is that 50 years ago, written in 1937, there was an intense 140 the Third Eye pioneering activity in research, both occult and scientific. The Theosophists, Christian Scientists, and spiritualists, the hypnotists, the mesmerists and healers resulted from these activities, to which were drawn many eminent men and women of the time, who have left behind a wealth of printed records of their studies and testified experiments. Much of all of these results may be doubted by the skeptics, but there is no smoke without fire. The impartial inquirer will do well to observe that in all these diverse activities much the same type of manifestations, information, and mysterious laws appears to have come to light. Those who were studying these things from the mental and philosophical angle were headed by a remarkable woman called H.P. Blavatsky, whose strange personality seemed rather divorced from her profound and level-headed writings. She made a deep and exhaustive search into ancient Eastern mystical records and produced almost an encyclopedia upon the subject in her Secret Doctrine and other books. The Theosophists, headed by Annie Besant, carried on the work. During the same period a very ancient sect called the Rosicrucians were allowed to begin to give out a little of their knowledge to the public. Some of this work was accomplished by Rudolf Steiner and men like Max Handel. The less intellectually inclined were provided for by the spiritualists, Christian Scientists, Mesmer, Dr. Coué, and others. Everything was done by fair means, and possibly foul, to awaken people to a sense of the potency of the inner worlds. The seeds thus sown germinated and persisted. Today there is a big field of these activities, and excites little comment because it has grown to be a part of the life of the public. What are the principal elements of the more exalted of these teachings? We hear first of all of the great plan for the evolution of humanity, which develops through spirit ensouling 7 great races and dwelling on 7 great continents, of which Lemuria and then Atlantis were the first 2. The earth itself is to have 7 successive incarnations before becoming spiritualized. All this is only a tiny little 141 the finding of the third eye cog in the wheel of planetary evolution. Planets come into successive births just as does humanity, both individually and collectively, and so do solar systems. Presiding over our solar system in the hierarchy, and all their staff of graded helpers, mentioned in the Bible as the 7 spirits before the throne, the archangels, angels, cherubim, and seraphim. Humanity is in the school of earth, graduating to be qualified to fill such exalted positions in the dim future. The first to pass these mystic examinations, called initiations, will be ready to replace those of the celestial company who are promoted to higher positions. Having attained such status, they have no longer any need of earth lessons, but they sometimes elect to come back to help humanity and set them an example of the perfect human life, as did Jesus Christ, the Buddha, and many others in earliest history. In fact, we are told that the gods themselves instructed humanity at the dawn of history, at which time humanity was entirely conscious of the inner world and had gradually to learn to become aware of the crystallizing physical plane. The gods, or those members of the hierarchy who are in charge of the elements and the different forces of nature, have always been appreciated throughout the ages and worshipped in excellent symbolical form by such people as the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and the Chinese. All these faiths in their original root form acknowledged the one God over all. For instance, if we study the revival of that pure religion as it was cultivated by King Akhenaten, we will see that he founded it upon a former faith, existing thousands of years previous to his time, which worshipped the one God. We are told that humanity has had to pass through a long dark age of materialism in which to learn to master physical matter by its own means. This accomplished, it will rise once more from the maya or illusion of the importance of matter and focus its eyes upon the real inner world of causes and realities. Human beings were built originally, we are told, with a special organ with which to register the finer vibrations of the physical world, the realm of the ethers. 142. The third eye. This organ was known, as we have said, as the third eye. The third eye is placed between the other two, at the root of the nose, and has its seat near the pineal gland. It is said that the earliest people of all used only that middle eye, and were known as the Cyclops. We are told that during the embryonic development of the human species, at first man's only organ was one which he used to feel with, and to differentiate between heat and cold. In time this organ recessed, and the first sense, of touch, spread all over the nervous system and through the skin. Apparently man's second organ to develop was his one eye, which he used to see all non-solid matter, which was all that existed at the time. As the earth solidified, man developed his two physical eyes with which to view the solid world, and his second organ recessed, its etheric side spreading all over the nervous system and having its seat in the solar plexus. It is said each of man's five senses will eventually spread all over his body in the same way. The capacity for sight in the lower non-solid etheric portion of the physical plane is therefore one of the most primitive involuntary functions, which man shares with the animals. It is only when this ability is brought by willpower and training under the control of man's higher faculties, and made to work in conjunction with the centers in his head, that it becomes of real value. Thus coordinated, all three activities are often classed under the heading of the third eye, and for the present it will simplify matters if we sometimes do this also. As physical eyesight developed, the etheric eye recessed, but although dormant at present in most people, it is only awaiting development and training to be reawakened. This training is a part of deliberate mystical development, which was well understood and thoroughly provided for in the ancient temples. No high ruler or pharaoh was eligible without such training. The fact of his finished apprenticeship was announced by a knob upon the forehead of his statue, representing the awakened third eye, or by a serpent's head rearing from his own show that he had raised the Kundalini serpent. 143. The finding of the third eye. The Chinese mandarin wore a peacock's feather in his head dress to represent the same development. The functioning of the third eye puts the individual in touch with the greater part of the physical world, all that part which is invisible to the physical eyesight. The physical world is divided, as is all else, into 7 interpenetrating planes or strata. These are solid, liquid, gaseous, and 4 kinds of ether. The physical eye can register or see the vibrations of the first 3. The third eye can voluntarily register or see the vibrations of the 4 ethers. Certain creatures and types of activity, such as human beings and waterfalls, have their final outer expression in solid form. Many other beings and types of activity have their final outer expression in ether form or etheric matter as it is called. For instance, we are told that the angels have an etheric body as their outer coat instead of a solid physical one as we have, and that this is because eons ago, at the time when they went through the human or individualizing stage, the ether was the densest condition of matter in existence. When the third eye is open, the individual begins to see all the manifold creatures and activities of the ether, and he approaches much nearer to the causes and realities of life. The mind can have power over everything which it can visualize. Therefore, While man is thus studying and learning to comprehend life in the ethers, he is able to develop the power to use and control some of this life. He sees, for instance, exactly what his thoughts are and what happens to them. Once he has thoroughly comprehended the region of thought, he uses and controls his thinking apparatus to much greater purpose. He also studies the records of the Earth's history which exist in the ethers in photographic form. He also gains an acquaintance with the plane described as the fourth dimension, the power to penetrate with one sight or consciousness in every direction at once, and backwards and forwards through time. 144 The third eye. Time and space are physical attributes, but only an infinitesimal fraction of their limits can be apprehended by the senses while using their fleshly encasements. The yogi or sage who wishes to know truth at first hand, and to study the workings of the universe, sets himself earnestly and patiently to reawaken his third eye into activity, using time-worn and tested methods. He proceeds to study the conditions in each of the four ethers. He gradually accustoms himself to discriminate between and sum up the unaccustomed intricacies of interpenetrating, mobile and changing activities. The task is extraordinarily difficult and unimaginable to the ordinary man, but the sage has access to instruction and help of which many of our less advanced mediums and psychics of the West are ignorant. Truth is the essence of purity, and therefore, as the sage knows, can only be contacted by one of a like vibration. Therefore the wise one acknowledges the first step to be the attaining of a condition of purity, purity of motive and purity of living, a very little understood condition. He next works to bring the brain under the complete subjection of his will instead of at the mercy of outside influences. By a series of carefully planned exercises he trains his mental equipment in much the same way as a dancer trains her muscles. The dancer gains complete control of her body at the cost of tremendous work and sacrifice. The sage, for about the same cost of effort, gains complete control of the mind. The mind is a very powerful instrument. We cannot say much about it at this juncture except that it can be compared with material of electrical consistency which has, if concentrated to one point, the same burning quality as fire. If a mind is divided upon several thoughts, its burning force is dispersed in various directions. If concentrated upon one point, it becomes as a burning glass to the sun of its own ego. The effort of the yogi, or any spiritual aspirant, is directed towards achieving one-pointedness of the mind. With this sharp instrument he can then bore through all the shells of illusion to the 145, the finding of the third eye, very truth and essence of all life. He can then deliberately wield and mold with his mind creative patterns which will help to shape the future. He is no longer confined to the haphazard creative efforts of the average man. He can create from the inside with the invisible sources of things. With such capacities he can heal, prophesy, and teach from the source of truth. Such attributes the true Christian also is dedicated to seek, because they are the gifts of the Holy Ghost. To do these things, however, it is not enough to have opened the third eye, or the eye of the soul. This knowledge of the universe must be linked with the highest creative force within the body before creative activity can follow. The seat of this creative force is in the throat, in the thyroid gland. When the magnetism of the soul dominates the body, it draws up reserve force from the base of the spine, where it was used for the animal nature, to the throat, as we mentioned in the description of the Kundalini serpent. This fire of creative force can then be used for inspired creative work of various kinds. But the highest expression of the power of the throat center lies in the spoken word. God spoke and created the world. Christ spoke and called to the dying to arise and walk. Man is a God in the making, and the goal is waiting before him. When once he has set his feet firmly upon the path of attainment, his earnest aspirations will burn the dross out of his body and mind. Then by degrees the centers of force located within his 7 major glands will be enabled to function. These centers, named by the Indians chakras, connect him with the knowledge of and power consciously to work in the different planes of matter. Man's whole mentality can by this means be reoriented and changed from a limited conception of third-dimensional objective life to a broad understanding concerning the why and the wherefore of the universe and his own part in the scheme of things. He achieves a telepathic union with the mind of the being whose body is the solar system, sometimes spoken of as cosmic consciousness. 146. The third eye. The science of self-development along these lines usually includes special dieting, fasting, breathing, and posture, but the principal aspect of this training is known as meditation. The practice of meditation is creeping into various of the Western cults and occult societies, under different guises, and, alas, in some cases, in incomplete and misconceived forms. However, the germ of the idea has already taken root in the West, and as everything is speeded up nowadays, it may come to be more quickly understood than we could expect. The third factor which is necessary for this attainment of man is the heart. Sequestered in one of the ventricles of the heart is what is called the seed atom of man's physical body. It contains a minute image of the man himself, and his own body is said to be a large replica of it. This seed atom is the little record, the actual essence of the man's personality, the link, or channel between him and his soul. It holds the silver cord to the heart, and when it is severed and death occurs, the seed atom leaves the body and is preserved in the subtler realms until the man's reincarnation, when he is formed from it again. We can say, therefore, that the actual man himself, his real personality, his essence, his memory, and all of him that will endure, dwells, in the last analysis, within the heart. For this reason all that man learns, through training and combining his physical brain with his higher mind, must be linked with his heart before it is really his. Christ said, "As a man thinketh in his heart so is he, and where a man's heart is there will his treasure be." The function, action, and quality of the heart is love. Love in its broadest sense is the desire for reunion with the divine spirit of the Creator which permeates all life. Love is the magnet which holds all life together. Its attraction is so strong that nothing can resist it. Through the direct access of the heart to the divine spirit of love or truth come those intuitions which are always more reliable than the thought-out processes of the brain. Everything which you can love you can understand. Put limitations to love and you limit. 147. The finding of the third eye life. That is what most of us do. We confine our love to one or two people and possessions, and close ourselves to the rest of life. To reach the divine truth, therefore, the heart must desire it, the heart must love it above all else. And then the power of the heart will link the man within it to his illumined mind and brain, the active pineal gland and pituitary body. The perfect triangle will have been formed, the triangle that has been drawn and symbolized and named in so many tongues. Then the birth of the God in man takes place, unless ye be reborn. We must quote the Christ in this connection because his great work, we are told, was to flood the earth permanently with his own great spirit of love, to make it possible for humanity to attain this rebirth of the soul through the pure straight channel of the heart alone. Since his coming, it has no longer been necessary to have strict occult training and deep mental development before spiritual heights can be achieved. From then onwards, the heart has been able to reach illumination through direct union, through love and worship, with the great Christ Spirit, and through following the standards set by its embodiment in the man Jesus. The sacrifice of the Christ Spirit in thus bearing the heavy mantle of earth vibrations in order to support the faltering heartbeat of humanity has been greater than we are able to imagine. Humanity would appear to be very slow in taking advantage of it, and seems hardly able seen to grasp the standards set for it as yet. Love thy neighbor as thyself, so simple and so clear. And quite enough to change this tortured earth to a lovely place. Be ye wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Here again we have the serpent as the age-old symbol of the Kundalini serpent, which rises up the spine and links together the great triangle. We can gather that Jesus Christ taught his disciples the science of meditation. Often he took them apart into a high place, or plane. We read that one of them even reached the third heaven and learned there of things which no man is allowed to tell. The Buddha sat in meditation for years until he had gained access to the universal knowledge. 148. The third eye. Such great spirits have done much of the preliminary work for us and have shared with us their knowledge, so all we need do is to profit by it. It is not necessary for all of us to travel the occult path, to study deeply and to train as mystics. We are all at different stages along the path. We must not overreach ourselves, or we will have to retrace our steps. Many of us, in fact, may choose, subconsciously, to continue with our most vital inner development only during our hours of sleep, and to withhold our growing knowledge, for the time being, from our little waking brain. But it is never too early for any of us to take the quickest way, to begin to learn to love, and to clear out all the accumulated rubbish of false thinking, intolerance, and greed which is robbing us of the light of life. Whether we choose to approach the truth through the discipline of study, complex thought, and abstruse language, or through the discipline of self-sacrifice and service, the essence of that which we seek remains the same, too simple for words or brain, just a letting go of fear and ambition for the self. We are trying to overcome habits of thought embedded in our personalities for centuries. For some of us this may only be possible at our present stage through the constant drilling of words, words, words. Others may be able to short-circuit them by a tremendous effort of love. But however the goal is approached, and however it is achieved, let it be borne in mind that the gate of man's deliverance, his birth as a god in human form, is heralded by the reopening of the third eye, after which he will remain no longer blind to everything in life except the tiny excrescence which we call the physical world. 149. First steps to mastery _________________________________________________________________________________________________________________ The mastery of which we speak is a potent inner quality that may manifest outwardly in various forms, according to the decision of the ego or inner man. We are told that the ego decides before birth upon the experiences, hardships, and conditions of life by means of which it shall learn its next lesson, develop its next spiritual muscle, upon earth. It then chooses, or is drawn to, a birth date which will tune it into such conditions, and selects parents with whom it had already built up certain karma or obligations in former lives. It is pointless, therefore, for the individual to try to shirk, avoid, or mitigate the experiences and difficulties of his life thus expressly selected to help him. To do so would be merely to postpone the issue and lose chances of development. The issue at hand is to learn a certain spiritual law, to cure a certain defect in character, and to develop a certain quality of mastery. Therefore an intelligent man will strive to discover where he stands and what is the lesson he is required to learn. If he is then able, by an effort of will, to anticipate this lesson by deliberately training his heart and mind to the stage required, he may in this way obviate the necessity for an unpleasant experience. Thus may a man learn to master his own stars, by eradicating in his character those vibrations which attract the analogous disciplinary stellar influences to him. The individual may choose thus to hasten his development by speeding up the improvement in his own character. Or he may take the simpler way of the heart, the way of intuition and love. In this 151st Steps to Mastery case he will, through opening his heart in love and faith, establish a direct link with the great plan, the joy of which superconscious knowledge will uphold him through all experience. It will illuminate his path through life, investing sorrows and joys with the radiance of their inner message, so that he would not wish one particle of his life changed. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor do palaces a paradise. Illumined poets throughout the ages have expressed these truths. Milton said, "The mind is its own place and in itself can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell." We have to learn to taste life to the very dregs while listening intently for the inner spiritual message which it teaches, and never losing sight of the inevitable and glorious goal, Godhood. The first step to mastery is, therefore, to put the mind in order, to train it to work clearly and dispassionately and to establish a true perspective on life. We must clear out from our minds quite mercilessly all the accumulated rubbish, so that we will have a clean free field in which to develop the marvelous latent powers which are our heritage. We must get rid of all inhibitions, all false values, uncertainties, indecisions, fussiness, and restlessness, all those states which eat away the vitality of body and mind. We have paid much money in the past to doctors and specialists to analyze our bodies for us. Finding the results not quite satisfactory, we instinctively turn to the psychoanalysts and psychologists, paying them to analyze that which we begin to feel is the root of our troubles. All those men do what they can for us because we have given them cause to believe that we do not care to hear the truth, namely that we could do much more for ourselves than they can do. Worry, rush, noise, anger, fear and envy poison the system just as surely as if we took arsenic. If we err sufficiently in any of those ways we die, therefore, if we err in any lesser degree we are still injuring ourselves, even although death comes more slowly, we shorten our lives. It is recorded that venom has been found on the tongue of a man in a rage exactly similar in its constituents to the venom of a snake. 151 The finding of the third eye. The same poison has been found to be generated in the body of an angry bull. Such venom would of course emanate in a fine form from the body of a vindictive and furious person, and act as a subtle poison to all contacting it. The story is told of the ward of a certain hospital for the wounded during the war, in which an alarming percentage of the patients died. Investigations were pursued and it was discovered that the matron had been all her life a man-hater. After her departure the death rate returned to normal. There is also recorded an experiment in which the breath of a person who was very much upset was caught in a test tube and found to contain enough poison to kill a small rodent in a few moments. The effects of people's emanations upon flowers, animals, and children is often very noticeable. Love and hate, then, have each their chemical form and action. It is obviously impossible for doctors or teachers to do us any permanent good until we learn not to poison ourselves and those around us. The true spiritual qualities entirely eliminate these poisons. Absolute faith makes fear and worry an impossibility. Unreserved love leaves no room for hate, anger, envy, or greed. Worship of beauty in abstract and concrete form strengthens and protects man in all his activities. One who is able to live in this way needs no outside help and sheds warmth and radiance on all around him. If we wish seriously to set the stage and prepare the way to this attainment, our first step must be gradually to eliminate all unnecessary thoughts, desires, and habits from our lives. Every day for a few weeks we should examine ourselves thoroughly, writing down honest replies to the following questions: what are our ideals? In what do we really believe? What is our ambition in life, and why? Are we prepared to face the truth about ourselves and make a change? Or are we liable to sit on both sides of the fence? 152 First steps to mastery. What are our faults? And what are our talents? What are we doing about them? What are the things which affect and worry us? Just how important are they? This examination should be persevered with until all the answers are clearly written down. It will be found that much sound thinking has probably never been done before. The result will be like a tonic to the brain and a stimulant to the endeavors. The important thing is to clear out everything from the mind which we can possibly do without, so as to concentrate all our powers upon the strictly necessary. One of the 7 devils of mankind is possessiveness. Possessions rule us while appearing to be our slaves. Our lives are cluttered up with possessions which we are sure that we need. They take up our time and money, tie us to places and complicate our lives in 1,000 ways. To be continually looking at quantities of possessions confuses the brain. A clairvoyant gazes at the crystal merely to prevent her physical eye from seeing any objects. She knows that to see them detracts from the powers of the mind. The yogi discards all possessions, and tries to discover the minimum needs for physical existence. Jesus Christ instructed his disciples to go out into the world to teach, taking only the barest necessities of raiment. Possessiveness is the root cause of all wars, tyrannies, and other obscenities. It is founded on an entire fallacy. If we endeavor to possess anything, we at once separate that thing and ourselves from the rest of life. We are meant to possess all things, to share all things, to be a part of all life, to have power over all things, not over one. If we insist on striking always on one note, the rest of the music is lost to us. The desire to possess people or one person also defeats its own end, restricts progress, and leads to jealousy, the gate of madness. We should respect the privacy and originality of every human soul and allow it complete freedom for development. Otherwise the inner spirit resents the outrage of repression and love dies. 153 The finding of the third eye. Possessiveness arises from the innate unconscious knowledge that we are born to own and to unite with all. We must learn to transmute our petty physical possessiveness back to its divine origin. By this achievement a great amount of the unnecessary will be removed from our lives. The next step is to study our own processes of thought. We will soon discover that we are usually thinking of 100 things at once. It would be impossible for several shorthand typists to capture all the thoughts which jostle one another through our brains in the space of a few moments. This shows that we divide the power of our minds up into about 100 parts, giving only a very small portion of it to any one thing. Therefore we do most things with a tiny percentage of our actual capacity, which usually remains forever unknown. Once having eliminated all unnecessaries from our minds, we can give undivided attention to anything we do. The completely undivided attention of the mind is all-powerful, omnipotent, a force that can burn through everything and bend everything to its command. This is known to occultists, mystics, and students of these things, who spend the best part of their lives in practices and studies with this end in view. In the West, such training as Pelmanism coincides in many particulars with the Eastern traditions and can produce similar excellent results. It can safely be said that nothing in any sphere of life will be successfully achieved until the capacity for one-pointed concentration has been developed. The third step in the preliminary process of self-analysis is to gain a clear conception of our sense of values and as concise an idea as possible of our definition of right and wrong, good and evil. Many of us do not agree with the statements of the Christian Scientists that there is no such things as evil and that pain does not exist. We feel pain, and we see evil and ugliness around us. Perhaps it would be more practical to accept the evidence of our senses and try to discover what part the dark side of life is meant to play in the scheme of things and how we can best cooperate. 154 First steps to mastery. A little thought will make clear that this world is built up in reality of a collection of opposites, and that it is only through being able to compare these opposites that we are able to have any views at all. Light would be meaningless to us if we did not know darkness, summer would be equally monotonous if we had no winter, warmth could not be appreciated if we did not suffer cold, peace and silence exist to us by reason of their contrast with noise, and goodness itself would be non-comprehensible were we not able to compare it with evil. Without sin and pain, where would we be? Perfect, with no possibility of further progress, static. If we are to evolve to something better on this earth, we must be given some means by which to do so. How should we be able to grow, to learn, to conquer, without such aids as sin, sorrow, and pain? If the imagination is sufficiently alive to picture a world devoid of evil, life would be seen going round and round in a complete groove, without incident, without change, getting nowhere. In the earliest days of the religion from which part of the Christian beliefs have sprung, Satan was worshipped. He was understood to be the greatest benefactor of man, placing before him temptations and experience without which he would remain stagnant and futile. Without experience man cannot create. At present humanity is said to be evolving from a state of ineffectual virgin spirit into self-conscious creative godhood, and this is mostly through the help of evil or Satan. According to this, then, one can no longer call Satan evil, nor can one think of evil as evil if it is so beneficial to us. It is possible, therefore, to say that there is no evil. What, then, is there? What causes all the trouble? There is only unbalance. Perfection is true balance of all the parts, whether it be found in a human face, in character, or in the works of nature. And this is where man's free will comes in. He is able to upset the ideal balance of things by stressing too much some particular aspect. This upsetting of the balance at once creates a state of non-perfection or evil. Too much stress upon the possessive feelings, for instance, produces the sin of jealousy. 155 The finding of the third eye. Too much stress upon the bodily sensations produces a glutton or a libertine. Too much stress upon mental sensations creates a crank or a fanatic. Even if a man puts too much stress upon his spiritual side and ignores his body, he may go mad, unbalanced, as it is rightly called. There are many lesser stages of madness not recognized as such: a snob, a miser, a murderer, all expressing advanced stages of overbalance or the putting of too much stress on any one thing. We all do this inevitably in one way or another, because of our free will, and in order to learn the great law of karma, cause and effect, action and reaction. Satan was at one time called the magistrate of God, the keeper of karma and of numbers. His work was to stand by and deal out the lawful effects of unbalance. It can be imagined, therefore, that the glutton might be given a diseased body, lasting throughout several lives until he learns balance in that respect. The fanatic or the man who has ill-used, or not used, his brain might be given imbecility for a life or two, until he learns to understand the necessity for keeping a balanced brain. The theory seems to be that the soul of man, in these cases, chafes with impatience within his imbecile or diseased body, bewailing the wasted time due to his former foolishness, and developing good resolutions for the future. It takes a long time for man to learn this simple law of cause and effect, and meanwhile he blames his parents, circumstances, or fate for his shortcomings. When he learns that he himself has been developing these shortcomings in former lives, he can no longer blame his parents. Nor can they say that they have not deserved such a son, for he is their karma as much as they are his. Finally, we are told, man will master this lesson of balance, or non-evil, in all parts of his makeup. He will learn to love deeply, but unselfishly, without stressing the self, understanding and forgiving all because of his own experience and realization of the laws of development. He will no longer give all his love to his own people and nothing to the world. 156 First steps to mastery. He will realize that all the world is serving him, with the experience he so deeply needs for his growth. And he will keep the balance by giving back to the world always, giving of all the love and understanding he has, without criticizing that evil by means of which others are striving to develop, just as he is. Understanding the law of rebirth, he will realize that all stages, either of ignorance, sin, unhappiness, or achievement, either have been or will be once his own. He will learn to balance his emotions with his aspirations, becoming dispassionately passionate, joyfully serious, calmly intense, unhurriedly quick, and actively passive. To attain complete balance in the character, self-study is necessary. Man, know thyself was inscribed over the doors of the wonderful ancient temples of learning as the most important injunction to all aspirants. The man who has mastered himself has mastered the world, is another well-worn saying, which gains in significance when we reflect that man is said to contain within himself a facsimile of and a link with everything in the universe. Having thus set the stage mentally and physically for our progress to self-mastery, we can now outline the preliminary stages of the actual process. The two most marked points in a person's life are the beginning and the end of his day, and it is to these, first of all, that we must give a special attention. There is a certain exercise which is given throughout the world to all those who are seeking wisdom and perfection. It is considered of primary importance, and like all exercises depends for its effect upon the regularity of its performance. It consists of a careful review of the events and actions of the day before going to sleep. The mind must travel slowly backwards through all the incidents, thoughts, motives, acts, and words of the day, seeking quite impartially for traces of unbalance and also for traces of wiser understanding. Experience gained must be noted, and 157 the finding of the third eye. A frank and cool summing up of failure and achievement must be made without either pride or condemnation. This exercise, if faithfully and honestly repeated every night, will work miracles in the character. It performs two services of invaluable importance. Firstly, it enables us to go through our purgatory here and now as we go along, instead of waiting for its advent in accumulated form at some future date. By this means we can cancel out whatever particular hell we would have made for ourselves, as well as much earthly karma. Our conscience, through being developed just like any muscle, will become so strong that in the end we will have as much difficulty in going wrong as formerly we had in trying to keep right. This is a fine way of clearing the decks for action, casting out much waste thought, remorse, and other exhausting inhibitions. It will mean, also, that when we pass out of the body in sleep we can travel straight through to the heart of things, without being held back to the coarser realms by any tormented earth-bound thoughts. Our sleep will therefore be deeper and more refreshing. We will have a better chance to gain the soul wisdom and inspiration which true sleep brings. This exercise also helps to etch experience into the memory, thereby avoiding the need for a recapitulation of the events, and so saves much time for the developing soul. The second of these vital exercises must take place at the moment of awakening. An effort of the will should be made to capture and remember the dreams or experiences of the night before they rapidly fade from the memory. All that is recollected, however trivial, must be written down. After some practice, valuable ideas, inspirations, and even prognostications will begin to be remembered. The final result will be an unbroken train of consciousness during the 24 hours, which consciousness man will learn eventually to carry straight through the veil of death, and back with him at his next incarnation. By means of these two simple exercises, the morning and the evening review, he whose inspirations are high, sincere, and enduring may begin at once to achieve his godhood and acquire his first-hand knowledge of the secrets of the universe. 158:15 Meditation _____________________ It is in silence that the soul speaks. Men have always realized the mystery of silence. They have ever been haunted by the feeling that silence and stillness are full of potent and vital something that is lost during activity and noise. Speech is silver but silence is golden, said the poet. As we gain in experience we will be able to observe that one of the hallmarks of men great in spiritual qualities is that they are calm, still, and sparing of speech, although extremely vital. If you meet a man or woman of this type, keep near to them. You will learn much from them, even without words. The science of meditation has been used throughout the ages as the means by which a man can link his brain, mind, and soul together, and connect them consciously with the universal intelligence, or the mind and motives of the creator of the solar system. By means of meditation man learns to concentrate and project his attention straight through the physical plane to the fourth dimension, then later to further dimensions. He endeavors to bring that which he learns through into the physical world, translate it into physical language, and interpret it into his own brain as best he can. In the realms which he may reach, language, color and form have quite different expressions to those with which we are familiar. He is getting to the heart of things, the underlying causes, the primordial truths which eventually give their faint distorted reflection as physical color, sound, and form. He learns much that cannot be expressed in words or even in physical thought. his brain must be gradually trained to encompass these unfamiliar aspects of life. Often this is well nigh impossible. 159 The finding of the third eye, and, instead, the knowledge is absorbed and held by his superconscious mind. It feeds strength and stability into his character without his being conscious of the process at all. The result of this union with divine intelligence is that man can now work in accordance with the plan. He is spared the tragedy of wasting his efforts in the wrong direction. That which he does and the influence which he spreads will be for the good of humanity. It will be a definite building up for future progress. The innate knowledge which he has thus acquired he may express in the creation of music, art, literature, a new religion, new economic or social developments, or else in an example of fine personal living. He no longer needs to have faith in the existence of ultimate and divine realities. He knows. He has put himself in touch and in tune with them, and henceforth can bask inwardly in the radiance and joy of his knowledge. He can mentally look down upon the conflicting processes of the world's development, including his own little suffering, much as one would study a fascinating Chinese puzzle. With one part of him he suffers and experiences, while at the same time with the other part he enjoys, comments and learns. To many people the attainment of such a state of knowledge and power has been all important. They have given up their lives to it. Such people are the yogis, disciples, Buddhas, and those of their kind in all countries. There is a fundamental difference between Eastern and Western peoples. Those of the East draw everything inward to themselves and hold it, and are comparatively inactive although they learn much, and are averts. Those of the West are full of action and energy, but give little time to studying themselves and acquiring deep knowledge before they act, extroverts. So in the East we find inspired inaction resulting in stagnation. And in the West we find uninspired action resulting in chaos. When universal love, neighborliness, and brotherhood eventually spread across the world, East and West will learn from 160 meditation each other and pool their attributes. The result will be inspired activity. We have already seen the earliest beginnings of this amalgamation around us. While Westerners are busy improving living conditions in the East, Oriental teachers of philosophy and spiritual laws are gaining a considerable hearing in the West. The ideal towards which we have to work is therefore meditation followed by action. Let us now consider the actual process of meditation and its several phases. Imagine a great orchestra playing a powerful symphony. In the orchestra is one delicate muted violin, which we cannot hear although it plays all the time. The louder vibrations swamp its sound. If the louder instruments be stopped one by one, the violin will still not be heard. Finally, when they have all ceased, we can suddenly hear it playing faintly. Our ears gradually accustom themselves to it until it appears to be making a volume of clear sound. This is a good simile of the process of meditation. The human being is like an orchestra of varying vibrations. The louder, coarser vibrations are those of the atoms of body and brain. The finer are those of the emotions and thoughts. The muted violin represents the soul's message trying to filter through. To hear the soul's message, all the rest of the orchestra must be silenced. All the criss-cross currents of bodily sensations, thoughts, memories, hopes, desires and emotions must be stilled into complete passivity. Then the brain must be held poised and ready to receive the impress from the mind of that which the latter has been able to translate of the soul's message. The soul is the ego's intermediary between the world of spirit and the world of matter, the storehouse of the results of experience in both realms, flashes of its knowledge coming to us as conscience or inspiration. The soul has been likened to a mirror which can reflect the spirit world into the physical, but is usually too clouded over with vibratory disturbances to do so. Now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. 161. The finding of the third eye meditation stills the vibratory disturbances of the personality, and the mirror clears. The first stage in meditation is therefore complete bodily relaxation. This cannot be accomplished when the body is in the wrong position. There are one or two postures which have been proved to be suitable. The spine must be erect and well balanced, and the ribs must be free for deep breathing. The early Egyptians used to sit very upright upon a chair with the eyes gazing straight ahead, the hands palm downwards upon the knees, the elbows well tucked in to throw out the chest, the heels together and the toes apart. They have left many statues represented as meditating in this position. We are told it is the one best suited to the Westerner also. The Indians meditate mostly sitting cross-legged upon the ground. Those who are skilled and expert use the lotus posture, in which the soles of the feet are turned upwards and the body is locked and balanced in such a manner that should the devotee pass into a trance he cannot fall over. The chins also squat, using various postures of the hands and feet to achieve different results. The Westerner who is making a beginning should adopt the Egyptian pose, and learn completely to relax sitting upright, and balancing the spine, neck, and head so carefully that he ceases to be conscious of them. He must then commence to breathe deeply, silently, evenly, and slowly, through the nose, and gradually perfect this process until he can perform it also unconsciously. The slower the breathing, the easier the control of the mind, but only that which can be performed without the slightest effort or strain is of any use whatever for his purpose. By means of these two preliminary steps he has begun the process of stilling the vibrations of first his physical and then his etheric body. The next and more difficult task is to tackle his emotional and mental equipment. He must drop all feeling, all stress, strain, and longing for accomplishment, all anxiety or excitement at the prospect. 162 Meditation in view. Excitement and emotion are formed of low, heavy, and noisy vibrations. There remains now the brain, that bustling little typewriter which ceaselessly taps out the drifting or hurrying crowds of thought forms which flow through it upon the ether. The aspirant must patiently, continuously, and without effort, wipe these thoughts out as with a sponge upon a slate. This process also must be continued until it can be performed unconsciously, a difficult feat which may need months or years of practice. When, however, this has been accomplished, the practice of meditation becomes possible. In some occult parlance we are told to make the mind a blank for meditation. These words lead to an entire misconception. If the ear is listening very intently for a certain sound, oblivious to all other sounds, we do not think that the hearing is a blank. On the contrary, it is actively at strict attention. So must the mind be, in meditation, held at strict attention, ready to convey to the typewriter brain its interpretation of the impressions filtered through to it by the fine vibrations of the inner activities, the subtler planes where knowledge is. The best times for meditation are said to be upon awaking and at about 6 p.m. It should be practiced either before or several hours after a meal. The room should be dim or dark. The eyes should be facing a plain surface with, if desired, only one symbolical object on which to concentrate, or, if preferred, the eyes may be closed. We have now described the condition to which the aspirant must learn to bring himself if he hopes to practice meditation with any success. The science itself is divided into 4 successive stages: concentration, meditation, contemplation, and adoration. Only the first 2 are possible to any but the adept of full-fledged mystic, nevertheless we will describe them all. The process of concentration has already been partly analyzed. It consists in getting full control over the personality and then, when the aspirant's whole makeup is stilled and passive, in concentrating the attention of the brain to one point, keeping it clear, steady and 163 the finding of the third eye empty of stray thoughts, waiting to receive the information which the mind is collecting. When full concentration has been established, then meditation can begin. Meditation consists in studying with great thoroughness one object, subject, quality or force in life. As we have before stated, the concentrated one-pointed mind is like a powerful burning glass or magnet. When tuned into the particular vibration of any object or quality, it can burn right through to the truth of it and draw to itself everything connected with or of that same vibration. Thus, supposing the aspirant has chosen a violin as the subject of his meditation, he will first concentrate upon the violin, building up in his mind as vivid and complete a picture of the instrument as he is able. Then, holding the picture steadily before his mind's eye, he will begin to meditate upon the instrument, endeavoring to learn everything he possibly can about it. He traces its history, the wood and other substances from which it was made, the process of making, the story of its design, its passage through the hands of dealers. Gradually it will be found that facts and information come to light of which the aspirant was hitherto unaware. That is the secret of meditation, the possibility of actually learning without books, by active mental contact with the information sought. The aspirant who wishes to learn of love, unselfishness, or the reality of the divine spirit, can reach this knowledge through meditating positively but not vaguely upon it. Meditation can also be used to solve any of life's problems and difficulties. Simply state the problem in an absolutely dispassionate and impartial way, and wait steadily for the ideas relating to it to be drawn to the mind. A fair solution will almost inevitably arrive. The Oxford Group, now known as Moral Rearmament, use something of this idea for their quiet times. Needless to say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. It is better thoroughly to understand what is happening, to avoid the danger of self-deception creeping in. Meditation has to do with all the outer aspects and expressions of an object or quality, all its physical plane attributes. 164 Meditation. The third stage, contemplation, has to do with the inner meaning, cause and law behind any object or quality. In this case the mind ceases its activity and allows the subject of contemplation to speak, to yield up its secret and reveal the mystery of its truth. Having fully meditated upon the violin, if the aspirant could pass into the stage of contemplation, the envisaged instrument would disappear, leaving a space. Through that space would play the colors and forces of the subtler planes, those which form the archetype or celestial pattern from which violins are made. The aspirant would learn the why and wherefore of a violin, its part in the evolutionary process and the actual creative quality of its particular tone. These things would come to him in a form of knowledge not clothed in words, and he would be at a loss how best to register and translate it for his physical use. The fourth and last stage of this science is adoration, and of this it is even less easy to speak. Having learned both the outer and inner meaning of his subject, the aspirant has reached to the core of it. He discovers the core of it to be the same as the core of himself, both spring from and are a part of the mind of the divine Creator. Having pierced through to this glorious and blinding realization, the aspirant can lose himself for a brief spell in the knowledge of that perfect unity of love. This is his moment of adoration. Through the steady practice of meditation, man can cease to be as a puppet dancing on the end of a string jerked by some unknown hand. He can learn to climb the string with his mind and will and take control of the hand. He can become the friend and associate of the owner of the hand, and finally gain the freedom of complete identification with him. It must always be remembered when trying to describe non-physical states that physical language contains no suitable words or phrases. The unaccustomed brain must be presented with a simile only. When, through study or meditation, the brain has developed and adjusted itself, the same truths can be presented in a more advanced manner which would not have been understood before. 165 The finding of the third eye. Therefore it is true to say that there is always much that is superficially incorrect in occult teaching, and in, for instance, such a book as this, because the neophyte brain must be coaxed along step by step, the pill of truth coated with the sugar of inaccuracy, until it becomes palatable in its purest form. However, books or no books, the truth is always there for those who desire it above all else. Another type of work for those who wish to push forward is group meditation, or the blending of a small group of people to meditate in unselfish brotherhood together. Inasmuch as this calls for the breaking down of many of the barriers that exist between the nicest of people, barriers of self-consciousness, intolerance, criticism, and egocentricity, it is obviously a very fine practice. Christ said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them," thus pointing out that unity is strength on spiritual as well as on physical levels. It may be inquired whether prayers do not suffice instead of meditation. Prayers are the 5-finger exercises, the ABC of spiritual growth. As such they will forever play their part. But he who is not content to remain spiritually in the nursery will sooner or later require to put himself more individually in touch with the realities. 166-16 History of the Wisdom. Both the Bible and the history book, while being compiled for us, have passed through intensive censorships, besides suffering at the hands of unenlightened translators. The result is that our orthodox education, both in religion and history, is often very misleading, and keeps us in complete ignorance of large and vital aspects of humanity's evolution. Much of the records of the knowledge to which we would like to have access has been carefully guarded, secreted, and even destroyed during periods when it was considered more expedient to keep the people in ignorance. Nevertheless, there is still a wealth of literature all over the world awaiting the explorer. If he pursues his inquiries with patience and discrimination, the following points will come to light. The history of this earth is infinitely older than the modern historian admits. There exist many and various sects, orders, and religious and philosophical fraternities, who all possess exhaustive records and treatises describing the evolution of man upon this planet, and of the part that our solar system plays in the cosmic scheme. If the pure and original root of these different beliefs can be uncovered, it will be found to be identical in most respects. In each case we will discover that the one God over all was acknowledged, and that the existence of the hierarchy was well understood, and was tabulated and represented under the names of various gods and goddesses, nature spirits, and demons. The 7 great spirits, their colors, attributes and elements, the 7 planes and man's 7-fold bodies were all carefully studied and analyzed. The Great Cosmic 167, the finding of the third eye cycles and periods, as ruled by the signs of the zodiac and all the astrological influences, both psychic and chemical, were subject to intensive research. The laws of rebirth and karma were embodied in all these beliefs. We find that at the zenith of their civilization the various great ancient nations had perfected this knowledge and by its means produced immortal monuments to their science, such as the Great Pyramid. It transpires that such a golden period in the history of a nation was followed by crystallization, stagnancy, degeneration, and a final breaking up, leaving only distorted, misunderstood relics of the once great knowledge. We learn that such great cycles were said to occur regularly under astrological influences which provide for the continual recommencing of man's lesson on a higher turn of the spiral of evolution, so that his development becomes ever subtler and more complete. Before each new surge forward of enlightenment, man must be borne down within the crouching wave and submerged in darkness and ignorance. In all these records reference is made to the wonderful golden age which occurred on the continent of Atlantis, which was said to have submerged during its preceding period of degeneration. Mankind was said to have been taught the ageless wisdom by the gods themselves upon Atlantis, and to have carried its remnants with them in all directions as they fled to safer land. The story of Noah and the Ark is repeated in many tongues and in not very varied guise. The Atlanteans were said to have founded the Egyptian culture and to have built the Sphinx, and their descendants the pyramids. It is believed that the early Egyptian religion thus founded was the father of all the faiths which spread across Europe and Asia, as far north as the Eskimo and the Laplanders, and as far east as China and Japan. In South America also perhaps the greatest of Atlantean colonizations took place, but at a still earlier date. There have been at least 300 books written about Atlantis. The remains of its root language are said to be found in identical form among the Welsh, Irish, Basques, Western Spanish, and on the Canary Islands, Azores, Easter Island, and in Mexico, as well as 168 history of the wisdom, certain practices and beliefs. The Druids of England were believed to be the descendants of Atlanteans who built Stonehenge and other little understood monuments in the British Isles. We find also that a realization and consciousness of the inner realities was the prerogative of ancient man all over the world, even if he lived as a barbarian. He did not need to believe in an afterlife and a world of spirits. He knew. He saw ghosts, and he understood their difference from spirits. He communed with his dead. He knew of the nature spirits, who ruled the elements. He understood their qualities, colors, and their prototypes among the animals. He used animal effigies to represent them. The Zuni Indians prayed to 7 great nature gods by means of the 7 colors painted on their prayer sticks. The Tibetans also pray in accordance with colors, and design different colored masks embellished with a large third eye for their devil dances. In New Guinea the doctors paint their patients with the colors of the particular spirits needed to effect a cure. The early Britons painted themselves with the colors needed to stimulate their prowess. The color of the spirit of darkness was usually black, of light, white, of water and vegetation, green, of air, blue, and of fire, red. There was always the one great spirit over all whose color was golden. In Egypt Horus was white, Osiris black, Shu red, Amen blue, and Number green. The Egyptian wisdom was brought to a high point under Ptah in the Temple of Memphis. Wise men and students traveled from all over the world to study with the Egyptian priesthood, whose famous pupils included Moses, Jesus and Pythagoras, it is said. The Egyptians named, described, and drew man's 7 bodies, and went fully into all his activities after death. They understood the etheric, astral, mental, and spiritual planes, also purgatory, paradise and the successive heavens. 169 The finding of the third eye. In their renowned collection of pictures and writings called the Book of the Dead, most of their beliefs are set forth. They considered each human being as living with one goal in view, that of perfecting his character in earthly life in preparation for his journey through the nether world or astral planes, and his gradual progress through the subtler planes to paradise or the heaven world, helped by the various workers and representatives of the spiritual hierarchy. The greater part of the Egyptian consciousness was concentrated upon the path of attainment and the evolution of mankind. By means of astronomy and astrology they mapped out a wonderful and stupendous panorama of the plan of evolution and the history of the world. They originated the belief in the Messiah, whom they called the ever-coming one. He was the Egyptian Jesus, called Iosa or Horus, and was reborn every 2,500 years, or every time the earth passed into the next sign of the zodiac. During each of these great 2,000 and year periods he embodied the quality, lesson, and type of the sign. For instance, under the sign Leo, Iosa, or Horus was worshipped as a young lion, and it is probable that the Sphinx was raised in his honor. He was born as a Scarabaeus in Cancer 1012,000 years ago, in which sign was also the crib or manger star, and that of the S. During that period the scarab was worshipped. During the sign of Taurus the bull, he was born and worshipped as the golden calf. During the Jewish dispensation he was reborn as a lamb in the sign of Aries the ram. And finally in the Christian era in the sign of Pisces the fish he came as the Jesus Christ of the New Testament. The sign of Jesus was a fish, which is still engraved upon the Pope's seal ring. The early Christians were known as the Pisciculae. The cross was used 7,000 years ago in Egypt to represent the power that upholds the human soul in death. The story of Jesus, of the Annunciation, the virgin birth, of his baptism, temptation, teaching, miracles, disciples, the Last Supper and his resurrection had all existed and been elaborated in Egypt for 10,000 years. Ancient Egypt, the Light of the World by Gerald Massey. Apparently it was merely adapted by the writers of the New Testament and modeled 170 history of the wisdom onto the life of the new and greatest Messiah, with certain alterations which clouded some of its deepest meanings. There is only space to touch on this interesting subject here, which can be studied at the student's leisure. Each of the great ancient religions had its book of records and teachings, which were for the outer ring of students. This book was always supplemented by a commentary written for the inner circle of the priesthood, explaining the secret symbolism of the book and the mysteries therein concealed. Sometimes there was a second and third commentary giving the deepest inner meanings. These keys or commentaries were carefully guarded and hidden, and in many cases have apparently disappeared altogether. The ancient Indian philosophy began with the Veda, including the Upanishad books and their great commentaries. The Rig-Yajur-Vedas are some of the earliest records of Aryan thought. They come between the Egyptian and the Greek civilizations, and are assigned to about 5000 BC. They worshipped a heavenly father, Dion's Pitar, and spirits controlling the elements. They had a very deep conception of the one God. The Indian Book of Moral Code, called the Laws of Manu, taught continence and moderation and the striving for a spiritual second birth. All 10 of the Indian philosophies taught reincarnation. Shankara, born about AD 788, was the great Indian saint and elucidator of the Upanishads. He wrote one of the world's masterpieces, his commentary on the Brahman Sutras, the Upanishads, and his Song of the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita. He was a great adept in yoga. Yoga is not a religion. It is a science, a method of yoking up with the Supreme Self, a practice of extreme discipline for the attainment of perfection. A yogin is one who has studied yoga, often at the Buddhist University of Nalanda. The Buddha was the great Indian mystic, founder of Buddhism. The Buddhist philosophy is based on the law of karma. The Brahmins believed Buddha to be the reincarnation of Vishnu, their 171, the finding of the third eye ancient teacher. They absorbed his teachings, which also took hold in Tibet, China, and in Japan among the Zen monks. The Tibetans have also a Book of the Dead containing the Bod, which is a guidebook to the dying during the 49 days which constitute the intermediary stage between death and union with the divine. Passages from this book are read to the deceased for 49 days after his death, while he is supposed to be passing through the 3 lower astral planes and viewing the panorama of his created thought forms. He finally realizes illusion and craves a new rebirth. He is exhorted to believe in the one great divinity of whom he is a part. In Persian a very fine philosophy was cultivated. This was the Sufi with its book the Avesta. This was built upon a very early worship of the sun god Mitra, which at one time held great sway in Europe as well as upon the teachings of the prophet Zoroaster. The Rabiat of Omar Khayyam is inspired by Sufism. The Sufis find ecstasy through losing themselves in union with the one divine spirit. Some of the fakirs and dervishes are their offshoots, but these are sometimes degenerated. The Mohammedans possess a great wealth of philosophy in their book the Quran, which also teaches an aspiration to unity with the one God. In China the religion, whether Buddhist or Taoist, is built upon the teachings of Confucius. Confucius was a very practical teacher and social organizer. Born in 551 BC, he worked to develop social science and the building up of individual character, and did much to bind China together. He was almost a contemporary of Buddha, and was greatly influenced at one time by Lao Tzu. His pupils recorded his teachings in a book called The Digested Conversations, a large part of which was burnt later during the Tizin dynasty, with the usual object of keeping the people in ignorance. Confucius believed in the one God over all, and in 3 types of subsidiary spirits. He called himself the transmitter of the wisdom of the ancients. Lao Tzu was the Chinese Jesus. He was born of a virgin mother, conceived under a falling star. He was a high mystic and left 172 history of the wisdom, a famous book called Tao the King, which expounded a moral code for the way of attainment. Tao means way and represents the aspiration of the Taoists. Lao Tzu believed in reincarnation, karma, and the victory of gentleness. The Japanese state religion was Shinto. Shinto means the way of the spirits. Some of the Japanese became Buddhists, and nearly all of them became Confucians as well. Then there was a very stern type of Buddhism called Zen, which gained great sway in China and was finally transplanted to Japan. The Zen classic is a poem called The Taming of the Bull, the bull being of course the animal nature or materialism. The Zen monks originated Jiu-Jitsu, which has a deep scientific and mystical origin, and was practiced by their famous samurai warriors. The Greek philosophies, founded by Pythagoras, Plato, and others, upon the Egyptian teachings accepted rebirth and other of the ancient doctrines. The Jews have their own great book of ancient records called the Kabbalah, and the inner meanings of these writings were sought and studied by the famous alchemists of the Middle Ages. The Christian Church, as founded in Rome, guarded many priceless manuscripts. It accepted reincarnation and karma, as it said that Christ had also done. But from the First General Council of Christendom at Nicaea in AD 325, to the last council in Constantinople in AD 869, Christian principles, rules and teachings were subject to many deletions and changes. The result was to decrease public knowledge for the aggrandizement of the priesthood. From that time onwards all who possessed or were teaching the secret wisdom were mercilessly persecuted and put to death. Henceforward the occult sciences were studied in secret. They were guarded and kept alive by such people as the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, alchemists, troubadours, Knights of the Grail and the Round Table, and the Avengenses or paper makers. In Russia there were the Trots, and in Britain there had been the Druids. Earlier still, in Mexico, there were the remnants of the teachings of Quetzalcoatl, and of the ancient Atlantean settlement at Peru. In 173 the finding of the third eye Chaldea there were the Magi or magicians, the famous astrologers who possessed the Egyptian wisdom and knew of the time and place where the new Messiah should be born. And in Palestine itself the wise ones belonged to the sect called the Essenes, which had existed for 8,000 years, and was to have the privilege of training Jesus. Everywhere in the world the self-same ancient wisdom can be traced, until its widespread stamping out and persecution at the beginning of the Dark Ages from which we are now emerging. And everywhere in the world at present are the signs of the re-emergence of that wisdom back into the light of day, not as the prerogative and secret of the priesthood, but as the hard-earned right of the whole of humanity. The tables have indeed been turned, and now we find much of the wisdom outside the churches and temples instead of inside them. Humanity is taking its salvation into its own hands. That is because we are now coming into the great Aquarian age under the sign of the zodiac Aquarius, which will last, as do all the signs, for about 2,000 years. During this time the waters of life will be poured down on all mankind, and the astrological influences will bring a golden age to birth. Many believe that the ever-coming one will arrive again in his newest guise, which we may not yet know, but great will be the fulfillment for those who are ready and awaiting his coming. 174-17 The present awakening ______________________ having taken a lightning and very superficial survey of the history of the ancient wisdom, we can now trace the evidences of its resurrection at the present time. The first steps were taken towards the end of the 19th century. H.P. Blavatsky contributed greatly by her inspired researches among ancient documents and the treasures she brought to light and so tirelessly analyzed. She founded the work which has since been carried forward by the Theosophists and which consists of a modernization of some of the ancient doctrines, together with public instruction in the form of lectures and libraries. Various other teachers and communities too numerous to mention here have come forward all over the world to add their quota to the widespread interest. Some of these stress the mystical side, some the occult, and some the practical. Everywhere there is a banding together of earnest people thrilled with their particular fraction of the unearthed wisdom, each little group usually convinced that it possesses the one and only truth and way of salvation. For a long time progress has been hampered by the old feeling of separatism and the intolerance of another's method of approach to the truth. But even that handicap is finally beginning to be overcome. The cry for worldwide unity, peace, brotherhood, and the casting down of barriers is increasingly making itself heard. The League of Nations points the way, however imperfectly, to the future welding together of the nations. 175 The finding of the third eye. Such a movement as the Oxford Group, now moral rearmament, appears to be inspired, in spite of handicaps, to work for the future fusing of all classes in a common Christian spirit. Fraternities like the World Fellowship of Faith have fought against almost insuperable odds of intolerance and stagnation, to draw together the religions of the world and bring to light their fundamental sameness. Groups have been formed all over the earth for purposes of spiritual propaganda, united meditations, and training for the selfless service of healing and harmonizing by thought and prayer. The word international is now so much in use that it is almost becoming a household word. Humane societies for the prevention of cruelty of all kinds are also doing valuable work and gaining increasing support, while education and health culture are being revolutionized. Nudist movements, vegetarian and nature cure practices, biochemistry, and the latest method of psychoanalysis, all point the way toward the future universal yoga of physical attainment which is being ushered in. The promised individualization of the Aquarian age is already in evidence. No newspaper can hope for success unless it provides crossword puzzles or competitions, or in other ways allows its readers to contribute each his own quota of self-expression or effort. No film star dare run the risk of ignoring the individual outpourings and demands of his fans. From the lowest grades of humanity to the highest can be seen signs of increasing independence, self-consciousness, and awareness. It is true that at the present time the world is racked in parts by wars and bound down by oppression and dictatorships, and that much cruelty and selfishness is in evidence. But these very activities are a proof of the restlessness and striving among all ranks, the stirring up of the mud in the pond before it can be cleaned. It is like the final orgy of a drunkard which precipitates the violent reaction through which he is able to regenerate. 176 The present awakening the urge to combat stagnation and to struggle out of the ruts of convention and go forward no matter how has been evidenced for some time past in the adventures into modern art, modern literature, modern music, and even modern manners and morals. All these signs are healthy and promising and only await the leadership of those who have put themselves in touch with inner realities to bear rich fruit. One worldwide group of people, the men and women of goodwill, are pledged to contribute that leadership in all phases of human living, fired by a lofty ideal of brotherhood which remains completely nonpartisan and all-embracing. They are introducing an international periodical to foster the expression and reciprocity of goodwill all over the globe. This will be an advance on the hundreds and hundreds of periodicals already in circulation, which are each solely concerned with the activities and teachings of their own little esoteric fraternity. A deeper understanding of the arts and sciences is being taught by the schools founded by Rudolf Steiner, whose very name is an inspiration to students of the occult. And so the work grows on all sides. There are some, of particular gifts, who are practicing alchemy itself, revising the ancient mystic knowledge and probably preparing a wonderful step forward for medical science. Others are working faithfully and steadily to spin a web of constructive thought across the world by the formation of groups everywhere meeting regularly in meditation. In the church itself many are beginning to feel the fires of inspiration rising once more, and their congregations are quick to appreciate it. Even those courageous ones who seek to expose the shortcomings of the medical profession are met halfway by many of the doctors themselves. The flame of regeneration and renaissance is burning high already, and many are the little sparks, fanned by patient souls, ready now to flare into a rich fulfillment. 177 The finding of the third eye. We find too that a higher type of teaching is gradually permeating various centers of investigation, both spiritualist and Christian Scientist, occultist and psychic, a type of teaching which is insensibly and subtly drawing them all closer to each other. At the same time the materialistic scientist, chemist, and experimenter is, by virtue of his very persistence, approaching to the self-same heart of truth in his own way. A wonderful era may soon dawn when humanity will figuratively rub its eyes to find that blinkers and barriers of so many kinds have somehow melted away, and that it has learned to turn its back upon the illusion of division, and seeks only to unite and fuse all people and all activities into one coherent whole, which ever becomes simpler and more complete. 178 Dangers in the path underscore 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 He who seeks truth, the philosopher's stone, and is determined to uncover and master the secrets of the universe for himself, is treading a path beset with many pitfalls, dangers, and illusions. The weakest points in his character, the tiniest chinks in his armor will be cunningly assailed. Honesty is the talisman which will enable him to reach and to recognize truth, plain honesty about himself, his purpose, and other people. Seekers are sidetracked mainly by two things, a love of sensationalism and laziness, both of which undermine their honesty. It must always be remembered that sensationalism, or emotional excitement, is to the mentality what sexual overindulgence is to the body. Even religious emotion can be a type of mental sensuality, and therefore unbalancing. The discovery of truth is the most wonderful, powerful, and helpful work that any human being can undertake, and the capacity to understand it is the greatest attribute which the mind can cultivate. To attain this inestimable reward of wisdom, man must expect and be eager to go through at least as much discipline, study, and restriction as he would endure while learning the piano or training as a boxer. He must remember also that in the uncovering of truth there is never a last word, nor a completely accurate statement about any particle of it, because neither the human language nor brain can encompass it. Truth to anyone is only that much of it which he can as yet understand. At a certain stage even an untruth may be taught. 179 The finding of the third eye. For instance, primitive nations had to be given a jealous god of war, until they evolved sufficiently to accept a loving God of peace. The mind must be trained, just like a muscle, to cope with certain conceptions, and this very training enlarges and expands the capacity to understand still more. After a period of such training one can explain to an intelligent person something which he would have been quite incapable of visualizing at the beginning of it. It would have been impossible to talk of wireless, the telephone, or gramophone to a man 200 years ago, neither his brain nor language was equal to it, he was living in the Dark Age. But to one of the wise priests of Egypt living 10,000 years ago one could have talked of these inventions and probably obtained a few suggestions. To understand the fundamental truths of life is to understand all. Those are the truths which Christ said would make us free. The first effort of the seeker, then, must be to avoid laziness and to love honesty and discipline. When once we are attuned to this ideal, we will be enabled to distinguish a wise and good person from a charlatan, and so avoid an infinite number of disillusions and dangers. The hallmarks of the wise are easily distinguished. Wisdom gives humility, peace, poise, and strength. Its owner ceases to be afraid, to be rushed, sickly, worried, ambitious, emotional, sentimental or changeable. His voice is resonant, neither shrill nor grating, and his presence is never exhausting. A truly wise one will be sparing of words, now will he loosely speak of initiations, masters, visions, guides, or his own powers. People who talk of these things are childish, they have not felt the awe and reverence which first-hand knowledge gives. A wise one will never ask money for teaching spiritual things, it is against the law. He will have reached the stage where money sufficient for his needs comes without the asking. Nor will he ever try to persuade anyone to do or to think anything, nor will he attempt to teach unless earnestly asked to do so, for he has learned to have the greatest care for another's free will. A wise one seldom uses the word I 180 dangers in the path. He will never attack anyone, or any cause, yet he is full of strength and energy. He has learned to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. He is not a crank on any one subject. He has become such a reservoir of love and of constructive thought that he is a worker of white magic, lucky to those around him and the bringer of miracles to pass. Such a one is he who has for some while faithfully trodden the path of discipleship which leads to godhood. He passes unnoticed among all those who are not seeking with the same purity of motive, the same vibration as his own. He is sometimes very cleverly aped by the charlatan, or he who tries to serve both God and Mammon, the worker of black magic, the bogus spiritual teacher. This latter is usually very attractive to others. He has a strong personality, and often arouses extreme love and devotion in the people around him. This is because such a one has accumulated throughout many lives, because of his energy, the experience, vitality, and power which he can now use for either good or evil. A very evil person is potentially a very good one. It is the stored power which counts and which gains a hold on people. That is why the enterprising lost sheep is of more importance than all who stagnate meekly in the fold. If a charlatan spiritual teacher were to give himself up finally wholly to good, he would gradually defeat his own personality and lose, one by one, those habits and ruts of thought which give him what his friends would call his little ways, those very human attributes. A person who poses as a highly evolved being, a teacher of others, and yet has human habits and frailties, makes a tremendously strong appeal, because his achievement, apparently, needs little discipline and rigidity. For that reason his followers are eager to adore his personality, and he allows, against the law, such adoration. Thereby he feeds his own vanity and their attachment to physical form. They are not encouraged to discriminate, but to believe blindly what he teaches them. And the teacher, once this blindness is established, encounters no spur of criticism or judgment to keep him 181 the finding of the third eye to the giving of his best. So the little community soon becomes a sham and intellect retires. The inevitable result of this situation is that a hypnotic condition arises, due firstly to the teacher's desperate desire to keep his followers' attention fixed only upon himself, so that they will not discover better things outside and cease to contribute to his sustenance, and secondly to the wish of his followers to give themselves up to the lazy, emotional state of adoring a physical personality, believing in wonders without the use of intelligence, and flattering themselves with the importance of possessing a great teacher. This situation can frequently be met with. It is an ambitious imitation of the real thing, and because of a lack of honesty on all sides, it goes rapidly downhill. The culmination of personality worship, sensationalism, and hypnotism soon leads these people into the toils of emotional, sensual and sexual indulgence of all kinds. Fraudulence, destructiveness, perversion, and intellectual distortion flourish in this soil, and the link with the higher mind is broken. It was in such foundations that the horrible black mass and the orgies of black magic were able to take root. Black magic is simply the use of the developed mind power for a wrong purpose. It exists in ratio to the strength of will and intelligence of the person using it and the lack of such in the victim or victims. Any desire for power over others for either good or bad reasons is an act contrary to the great law which stipulates complete free will. The moment such power is established, we have a state of hypnotism, in slight or intense form, and therefore a condition of black magic. Black magic is not a thing of the past, it is a manipulation of natural laws. It is with us always, existing for instance in such groups round charlatan teachers as have just been described, existing sometimes side by side, almost hand in glove, with white magic. Rasputin was a typical example of a modern black magician, and I can think of other living examples who could also be listed in this category. 182 dangers in the path. All such groups provide interesting psychological studies. The author personally knows of several. In one, the teacher, a woman, claims to be the reincarnation of one of the apostles of Christ. This is earnestly believed by a worthy but hypnotized little troop of women followers, who are blind to the fact that their spiritual leader breaks most of the commandments under their very eyes. Another group is headed by a man who claims and is eagerly believed to be the reincarnation of three famous people in one. There are, I understand, several different reincarnations of the famous Rosicrucian Comte de Saint-Germain alive at present, each supported by his little group. In fact, up to date the author has been honored by the acquaintance of quite an array of reincarnated saints and historical celebrities. There are also, I am told, certain colored teachers claiming the highest spiritual status, of whose relations with their white women disciples it would be better not to inquire, the hypnotized women believing themselves to be nearly as honored as the chosen of the Lord, sometimes even with an acquiescing husband in the background. All these things are going on, comprising an almost inextricable mixture of good and evil. The wise seeker will learn to understand the necessity for it all, and wade through in safety, protected by the life belt of his own pure motives. He will not turn in dislike or disapproval from those leaders who savor of charlatanism or incompetence. They each have their audiences, who are drawn to them because of similar vibrations, and could go, at their particular stage, nowhere else. Sometimes good teaching comes from very faulty people. This fact is a means of stimulating students into recognizing truth for itself, as apart from a personality. On the other hand, a person who is intrinsically good and true may be unable to utter a word of sense to satisfy a seeker, nor take any interest in his seeking. The world is full of infinite variety, and all are seeking and learning in their different ways. It is hard to know who fundamentally is the most advanced. When the aspirant can understand this and grow to love his neighbors for their struggles and faults, and utterly abstain from any critical feeling, then will all things be added unto him. There will be 183 the finding of the third eye, no barriers to prevent it. Like attracts like, and his own honesty and charity will inevitably draw to him as to a magnet all that is good. By the same token, any weakness which still remains within his character will attract him to that with which it has affinity. If he has a latent tendency to accept too much from others, and to lean on them, he will be an easy prey for a certain type who bind people to them by a great show of generosity. If he finds himself saying, "The one thing I cannot bear is meanness, I do like a generous character," let him reflect that possibly he still has something of the parasite within him, and is not determined to be self-reliant. Let him beware lest he is captured by one who has learned how much it pays to be generous and how easy it is by that means to get some people completely under one's influence. Sometimes a teacher who preaches and practices generosity will soon obtain financial help from those well-meaning seekers who are able to give it, and will then proceed to gain more adherents by being generous with other people's money. This very real abuse is often put into practice, the final result being that much money which would otherwise be given to the poor is spent for the pomp and comfort of the teacher and his somewhat nebulous cause. A genuine teacher always deserves and usually gains support, but his pomp and circumstance is conspicuous by its absence. The final warning which must be given is about the imagination. By this word I refer to that power which the mind has to form images of that which it desires, and which it uses more successfully subconsciously than deliberately and consciously. There is a tremendous, intricate, and forceful world of subtle life lying just below the threshold of the conscious mind which can be manipulated to produce varied results. For instance, we sometimes hear of an earnest emotional female who has been practicing either meditation or psychic development not wisely but too well, describing a wonderful vision she has had, perhaps of the Christ himself, who possibly spoke words of praise to her. She becomes vastly important and ecstatic about the vision, and her friends are much impressed. 184 dangers in the path. But what really happened? To begin with, the lady by affirming such an experience gives away at once her complete ignorance as to what is possible in such a way. In all probability that which occurred was simply a case of imagination, self-hypnotism into seeing and hearing that for which she longs, or she may perhaps have picked up the thought form of someone else's imagery. In any case, the one thing certain is that if anyone were sufficiently advanced to obtain a genuine spiritual experience, they would be so filled with awe and so alive to the laws pertaining to such experiences that they would find it quite impossible to say a word about it. The only sign of it would be a radiance emanating from them to those who were sufficiently sensitive to feel it. The great Moses, after having talked with the Lord, was obliged to veil his face because it shone so much that the people could not bear to look upon it. Imagination can play us many tricks, but we can test things out pretty safely in the following way. Any experience we may have which makes us want to tell about it is not the real thing, but something to which we have laid ourselves open through an unconscious wish for a thrill or to acquire importance. Of a real experience we will never wish to speak, because we will realize intuitively that each soul grows at its own pace, and that our vision was sacred to us alone. The resulting faith that we enjoy is all we will impart. Therefore we must never be impressed by any idle and emotional talk we may hear about these things. It is important, however, to try to visualize the condition of that invisible envelope of compressed ether, for want of a better description, which surrounds us and goes by the name of our aura. This contains a vast panorama of photographs, astral talkies of all our memories, both conscious and forgotten. When we are forced slowly out of our bodies in drowning, we see this aura ourselves, and review a rapid panorama of the events of our lives, as has often been attested. Anyone who is genuinely clairvoyant, such as a crystal gazer or fortune teller, is able to see this aura on approaching us, and can pick 185 the finding of the third eye out pictures of past events, as well as those of our subconscious hopes for the future, and therefore describe intimately our dead relatives or our home life, almost as easily as we could describe any film we were watching. There is not necessarily anything wonderful, new, or valuable for us to hear, merely that which is already there attached to the mind. Sometimes, however, she may even get a correct picture of some future event. In this case, she is probably reading a thought picture in our aura which we brought through subconsciously from something we were allowed to learn of in a dream. For those who are tempted to explore the phenomena of clairvoyance, it is very necessary to study the human makeup from the psychoanalytical point of view, otherwise it is easy to be rendered awestruck by some occurrence for which there is a scientific explanation. The world is indeed full of many astonishing conditions and activities. It is better to have a clear understanding of anything untoward that occurs than to become paralyzed with superstitious emotionalism and be helplessly swayed by influences which might otherwise be either ignored or put to good account. There is no black magic, however powerful, no evil force nor astral horror which can have the slightest effect upon anyone who does not contain a strain of the same vibration in their own makeup. One who is completely honest and wholeheartedly trusts in the power of good is an untouchable as far as evil influences are concerned. According to thy faith be it done unto thee. Therefore, when any evil influences or threats of misfortune approach, the one attacked needs only to cleanse his own heart of fear, doubt, or any ulterior motives, and he is at once protected by his own vibrations. If we tune our wireless into Paris, we do not get Moscow, and if we tune our personal wireless into good fortune, all other vibrations will flow through and onwards without finding any anchorage. It is upon this principle that the Christian Scientists and many others work. They know that the fear of anything is a very powerful magnet which draws that thing inevitably to the fearful one. As Job said, that which I greatly feared has come upon me. 186 dangers in the path. Fear, laziness, and lack of sincerity are therefore the defects which will lead the seeker onto the left-hand path instead of the right-hand path. The natural karma of this is that he will have to do twice the work before he finally reaches his true goal. But if a sharp lookout is kept for the various pitfalls and illusions pointed out in this chapter, much waste of time and many painful humiliations may be avoided. Remember that it is always possible to go straight to the innermost goal and ignore the various stratas of comparatively petty psychic and mental phenomena which lie in between. The really wise have learned to know. They want neither proof nor practice, and they enjoy bliss and glory here and now, in spite of all circumstances and irrespective of either past, present, or future. 187-19 The summing up underscore 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 an effort has been made in this book to take a necessarily summarized survey of life as it confronts the independent seeker. The existence of a vast accumulation of so-called knowledge and belief has been pointed out. The conceptions of the cosmos which have held sway over millions for thousands of years have been briefly sketched. There remains one final theory to be expounded, that which is called by some people epigenesis. The name means an addition to that which was created, in other words evolution or progress. It concerns itself with the fact that in the continual reincarnation of all particles and phases of life the memory of experience is brought back plus the deductions and adaptation gained from that experience. The evolution of plant, insect, man and planet consists of a gradual refining, strengthening, and perfecting under the ever-changing influences of still greater developing bodies. Even in the vast cycles of historical development, each recurring sequence of Golden Age, Dark Age, and Age of Energy is reproduced on a higher and more powerful note, and embraces the tackling of more difficult conditions. Humanity has just been required to pass through an age of deeper ignorance, a more profound blind spot, than ever before, and has passed through it creditably. It may therefore look forward to a golden age which will bring deeper fulfillment and wider understanding and power than any preceding. Epigenesis is the answer to those who say that the world has not progressed, but only if they are ready energetically to seek this answer. 188 The summing up for themselves. In studying the great religions of the world, therefore, epigenesis must be taken into account. Each of the great teachers of the world, Zoroaster, Krishna, Lao Tzu, Buddha, adapted former teachings to the future needs of developing humanity, even though humanity lagged far behind in taking advantage of it. Therefore it is to the last great teacher, Jesus Christ, that we must look for the most advanced ideal and the latest message to humanity. We find that his work was to transfer the possibility of attainment from the few to the many, to simplify the great truths for the use of all humanity, and to introduce the ultimate act of attainment, the awakening of the love principle in the heart, to mankind. His teaching has been in some ways too simple for muddled and inhibited generations to grasp, but after 2,000 years there are faint signs that the seed sown is about to burst into life. Now, leaving the religious aspect completely on one side, let us consider entirely from the scientific point of view what the great teachings of the world, headed by Jesus Christ, would do for humanity if put into practice. The medical profession agrees that human beings are prey to the act of auto-intoxication, that is to say that they flood their own systems with various poisons bred by various states of the mind and emotions. The most poisonous of these states are fear, anger, worry, sentimental emotionalism and envy. The destructive emanations set up by these mental and emotional states must be clogging the virility and sensitivity of the race like a heavy pall, and we should not forget to add the emanations from terrified slaughtered animals to the general agglomeration. This terrible pall of thought poison is of course the breeding place for all those instincts which make war, murder, cruelty, lust, and stupidity possible. It beats with a heavy vibration, to which people are drawn, as a speck of iron is drawn to a magnet, if they have no stronger vibration of their own. From a scientific point of view their only protection is to develop stronger vibrations, which are those of love, hope, belief, charity, idealism and intellect. In other 189 The finding of the third I words, to learn actually to love one's neighbor as oneself and to have faith even as a grain of mustard seed. The result therefore of everyone obeying these plain injunctions would be to overpower, melt, or short-circuit this heavy pall, this rubbish heap of bad thoughts, breeding spot for the microbes of mental disease. Universal love, as we have pointed out, produces an understanding of all that exists in nature. The result of faith would be a lack of self-poisoning and therefore perfect health. The result of idealism and intellectual development would be complete normality of the reproductive functions, which would produce in its turn perfect eugenic conditions and a natural birth control. And the highly increased mental capacity thus evoked would be available for the solving of those economic and social problems which defeat the people of today. The practice of meditation, deep breathing, and self-analysis can certainly be the means of pulling people out of the slough of despond of accumulated generations of bad habits. It constitutes a scientific process of short-circuiting undesirable vibrations. From the purely scientific point of view, therefore, the following of the rules set forth by the great teachers would speedily produce ideal world conditions and the hygienic, eugenic Superman for which some nations are already striving, however imperfectly. From that which is called the spiritual point of view, however, the prospect is infinitely more thrilling, inspiring, and illuminating. He who is drawn to spiritual endeavor, who feels the call and the pull of the inner mysteries, will embark on a pilgrimage in which there is no turning back. He will go through the stages of studying the self, developing the self, and then forgetting the self completely. He will then realize that the ultimate privilege and joy, as Jesus Christ came to show, is to serve. His battle cry will be service. At first he will rush around trying to serve, and getting very much in the way of his own inspiration. Later he will realize that true service is first of all to be. He will 190 the summing up understand that if he has once polarized himself to be a permanent channel or receiving station for the light of wisdom, and can hold himself in that state of constant and unchanging radiation, he can become a fixed powerhouse, a torch in the realms of the mind. He can link up with others on the higher levels of their superconscious, he can speak to them and teach them in that sphere where are no words, flooding them with illumination, peace, and faith from his own storehouse. They have merely to think of his name and at once feel the anchorage of his vibrations. He learns finally how not to make conscious effort to help others, how not to interfere with their lives or their own way of working out their salvation. He learns not to criticize but to understand, and to be able to interpret them to themselves if they ask it, so that they can learn the particular lessons and reason of their difficulties. He learns to speak to each one who comes to him in his own language and on his own level. He learns to leave in peace those who do not seek his help, and to be a power of ready quiet strength to those who do. Such an aspirant will begin by envisaging the path before him, the progress from student to probationer, from probationer to disciple, from disciple to initiate, from initiate to master, from master to lord of a planet, and so on upwards and onwards illimitably. The dazzling prospect will spur him on over the difficult drudgery of the early steps. But when the gate of his heart is finally opened and the mystery of love floods his being, then all thoughts of his own progress are obliterated, and he would gratefully stay behind until the last faulty little pilgrim has passed safely on before him. He waits and watches and helps, and suddenly he finds that he is one in activity and in mind with the Creator himself. These things, however, cannot be expressed in words, although much glorious poetry and philosophy have been poured out in the effort. All through history humanity has been offered the key of heaven, even as this little book attempts to offer it. 191 The finding of the third eye. Men exist as partially dead creatures until they have used this key and opened their hearts and minds to reality. Then they are flooded with such life and brilliance and illumination that they do indeed experience a second birth infinitely greater than the first. As a final word, then, the value of the information touched upon in this book is merely that it can provide the reader with a tool for the building of his life. Like a knife, which can be used either to murder a beautiful life or to carve out an everlasting work of art. The value of the tool depends upon the user. It can quite definitely be used for unimagined achievement if the motive power be sincerity and the highest aspiration. Or it can result in a conceited boast of superior knowledge, the act of the big fish in the little pond, if the ideals are not sufficiently strong. Or again it can fall to the ground through lazy inattention. It is for each individual reader to decide whether he wishes to become a vital force for good, and to realize that until he is truly living for the world and not for himself, he will never achieve anything of that which is thrilling, joyful, wonderful and inspiring. A selfish person is short-circuited, nothing from outside can flow through. Some people are not selfish, however, but self-centered, which is just as inhibiting. They are kind, generous and vivacious at times, but their thoughts revolve round their own kindness and all their little personal affairs unceasingly, how they feel and felt, what others think of them, what they know, how they love, what they must do, how they must help. They are complete prisoners inside their own little personality. It is this I attitude which is so very difficult to get over, and which is such a subtle handicap to many. The only importance the personality has is that it is there as a sort of buffer, to teach one how completely to get the better of it. Personality versus individuality. How can we discriminate between these two? The difference is much the same as between emotion and love. Individuality, the real thing, is a calm, 192 the summing up steady, deep, and lasting force felt within a person, his essence, that which composes the ego or inner man. Personality, the word comes from persona, meaning mask, comprises all the little surface peculiarities, moods, and changes, all which has to do with physical life, disturbing,